Welcome to the Road to Geography 2050, where we'll do a deep dive into this year's symposium's theme, GeoAI and its power to shape our planet's future. The symposium, Geography 2050, is occurring November 20th and 21st at Columbia University in New York City. We hope to see you there. Hey everybody! Today we're on the podcast with Elizabeth Doughty. Elizabeth is an independent consultant who kind of bounces around the insurance remote sensing sphere, but I cannot introduce her as well as she can introduce herself. Elizabeth, you want to give a little bit of background of what you do and who you are?
Yeah, no, that sounds great, T. Thank you. As T noted, I'm Elizabeth Foudy, and I'm super impressed that T pronounced my name correctly because that's hella hard to do. So great job. Um, I work as an independent consultant right now across the InsurTech, AI, EO, multi-acronym space. And I kind of fell into it from a very random career path that started with about 5 years at NASA when I was in a machine learning team, a data mining team, back when AI was referred to as data mining, which means it was a long time ago. And that's where I really got introduced to the concept of that. And then I moved to RMS, which is now Moody's RMS, and became super familiar with the cat modeling space, learned about what reinsurance even is, because certainly prior to that, I had no idea. And after about another 5 years at RMS, decided I was ready for startup world. Still love tech, and so bounced around to a number of different tech startups, most of which fall somewhere in the AI space or the geospatial analytics area. Cool, high tech areas like autonomous vehicles, satellite organizations, and things like that. And then after about 7 years of that, decided to hop off and do my own thing, and now really niche down into this space, working with insurtechs and EO providers on their go-to-market strategies. So essentially how they can sell to each other more successfully.
So kind of B2B slash BTEO, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you also have a blog over on Substack, right?
Yes, yeah. And it's very much meant to be like, oh, I've just thought of this fun thing. I don't really have like an ideal outlet for it. So let me write about it. Kind of driven by like, what have I been talking about recently? Like, what came across my desk? I want to say some stuff. So I started this blog. It's called Insuragal, trying to make things more readable for audiences who don't understand each other as well, which is a lot of what I do in my day-to-day life. So helping insurers understand AI, helping non-insurance people understand insurance, and some of the challenges there is the goal. But I won't claim it's incredibly goal-oriented, but more of a fun side. Oh, I'm nerdy. This is interesting type
Yeah,
vibe.
we all need those outlets, right? Because otherwise it just sits in our heads until it becomes electrons. It's not real. Yeah, you wrote one at the tail end of last year called "GeoAI's Transformative Potential for Insurance and the Hard Bits," or and its hard, yeah, and the hard bits. What's behind that title?
Um, it's such an interesting space, and I feel like I have two different types of conversations about GeoAI whenever I talk about it. And one of those conversations is obviously this is the coolest thing ever. We're going to do it. It's going to be amazing. Everyone's going to do it in the next 6 months. And then the other side of that conversation is this is impossible. It's not really going to happen. It's going to be a decade. And I think it's somewhere in the middle, like most things. And a lot of my experience from that is I remember about 10 to 12 years ago, we were talking to all of the insurance companies about getting onto cloud. And it was very much the same thing where people were like, cloud is too hard. We're never going to be on it. Or like, cloud is here now. We're going to be on it tomorrow. And sure enough, it was somewhere in the middle. And now, 10 years later, everyone is on cloud. But they're not just getting on cloud today. Well, some of them are. but most of them are fully on board, and it kind of happened around the 5 year mark. And I think GeoAI is very much in that space. So I wanted to talk about how cool it could be, but also the very real challenges to implementation and how they can be overcome, and really create some interesting change in the
Yeah, because
space.
I know as I'm also in the insure vector or the insurance vector vertical. Um, I know like at last year Insure Tech in Vegas, there's everybody's talking about AI, right? But everybody's talking
Hmm.
about Gen AI, not necessarily Geo AI. Kind of to set
Yeah.
the parameters of the discussion, what do you see as the difference between those two things?
um, Generative AI is very cool, um, but it is not, I think, as transformative for the insurance space as GeoAI. And when I think about the difference between those two things, a lot of the descriptions in the title, right? Generative AI, you can generate new answers, new thoughts, writing and things like that based on these models, that have learned on a ton of data. And people are talking about it in the insurance space for things like underwriting guidelines, better marketing, agents, replacing agents with AI agents and things of that nature. And that's interesting, and I think has some interesting value, but I think it's really like around the edges. Whereas Geo AI, which I kind of foundationally see as applying AI to all of the geo data that insurers and reinsurers and everybody in the space needs to successfully understand and underwrite their risk, it can be transformative, in terms of applying all the different techniques that we've all learned, all the ability to handle big data, and really upgrade all of these data sets and foundationally change how we view risk, which is the actual bottom line of the insurance industry, much more so than like, oh, we've replaced, some people agents with AI agents, which is kind of like a dicey proposition, anyways. So I feel that is like the real change there and the real difference between those two things. And I'm going to get into like why I think Geo AI is more relevant than Gen AI, if that's
No, no.
interesting. I
Let's
assume
do
it
it. Let's
is.
go right into that. Just do a deep dive as you
Yeah.
go ahead, please, and thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So location based data underpins all relevant insurance risk data, right? On the property casualty side, insurance varieties where location based data is going to be really, really beneficial. And so that's definitely worth flagging. But we're sort of holistically talking about the insurance folks who think a lot about location, and what that means. And so, when you think about just underwriting at the real basic level, right, you want to understand all the characteristics of a risk, whether it's a house or a business or, what have you, or, a ship, a satellite, anything you're trying to underwrite. And so you need to know where it is, what hazards it's exposed to, the vulnerability of it, and all of those things. And right now, the data we use is really shoddy. Like, there's people, input their roof age. And I don't know about you, but I cannot, in like good conscience, say my roof is 10 years old. I don't know. We bought this house with this roof already on. It appears to be in good, if used, shape. It's unclear from public records when it was replaced, and it could be 20 years old. I don't know. And I think a lot of people feel that way, but that's just a proxy for actual roof quality, right? So if you can see or tell the roof quality from, say, an aerial image or a satellite image, then that actually gives you a huge leg up in underwriting. And that's just one thing, one aspect of this whole insurance chain. So you can imagine if you can apply that, but then you're thinking about roof quality, the property quality, what kind of emissions are around the property, what's the soil moisture content, a really sadly relevant conversation right now around vegetation and vegetation dryness. That the people of, I guess we're gonna mark this moment in time, the people of LA are currently struggling it with with wildfires and things like that. And so understanding that risk and the whole picture of it, as I think what Geo AI can do, and it can allow you to do things now at scale, that were just heretofore not possible. And underwriters were taking well-educated guesses at, but it was an art and a science. And I think we can convert it to a science and really understand that risk.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I did a presentation at a conference, and I kind of did a deep dive into how geospatial's evolved within insurance. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, until like 1995, they were using pushpin maps to determine to
Yeah.
balance out the risk. I'm like, yes, and now we're at the point where it's like we're creating these, lack of a better term, these large geospatial models that can help us like identify risks down to like on a level that people even like 10 years ago couldn't think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But insurance itself as an industry, and this has been well documented, is kind of slow to adopt new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that's going to affect GeoAI adoption into into risk modeling, catastrophic modeling, and other things within the insurance vertical?
It's definitely going to slow it down because the insurance industry is slower to adopt things. I don't always think that's a bad thing in the sense that they are a foundationally risk averse, by definition, industry. And that does mean, I think, there is an attempt to think through the implications. I do think it will take longer if people get distracted by, the underwriting guideline bot or the agent AI bot or whatever, instead of focusing on this. But I do think that this is an area where the insurance industry will get into, and once they really grok the power behind it, will start to move more quickly. So I think within the next 5 years or so, we're going to see a whole lot more. And there's little elements of it already. There's organizations that have been like plugging away at this problem for a number of years. Maybe weren't coming out right and saying, oh, it's AI, but it's computer vision and things like that. And people are beginning to adopt that, beginning to pull that in. And now that the capabilities around AI have really exploded, then you can start to add more than just those computer vision elements to that. You can build in more. You can include more data, more satellite data, more different written data, more data from the insureds that you want to include, holistic portfolio data, and build that into GeoAI
Yeah.
models.
So if I was in a hypothetical, let's say I'm a risk manager, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how would you? And I don't really, and insurance, as we discussed, is a geospatially aware industry, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't really understand that as well as other people. How would you sell GeoAI to me and get my buy-in?
Yeah. I guess I would start with wanting to understand, like, at a foundational level, how geolocation aware are you? Do you know the challenge inherent and even understanding exactly where a property is as sort of a baseline? Like, one of the big challenges is people like input, an address somewhere and they're like, oh, the property is here. But that's not actually always true. And that's actually a really, really hard problem to solve because it might be, you might have the address of 123 Main Street and it ties to a parcel, but where is the property, the actual building on the parcel? Computer vision can actually do things like use an image to determine the exact coordinate of where the building is on the parcel. And that suddenly starts to matter a lot for a parcel because, if at one end of the parcel is a stream and the other end is a road and there's a slight rise and the building is actually next to the road, that could foundationally change the risk that that building is exposed to. So now you can really get really detailed location information and allow that to drive, say, pricing for your underwriting. So if you're a risk manager, that could be a big difference. If you're right next to that stream and you're pricing on that, and an insurance company is assuming you're right next to that stream, they might price you much higher than if they knew you were right next to that road and it's never crested the rise. But they can't know that unless they know exactly, truly where that building is and where that building footprint is. And things like computer vision on aerial data, which is GeoAI, allows you to say, like, great, that building is right there. So that's just one tiny little use case that I would talk to a risk manager about think about your the savings, the underwriting pricing savings, the more accurate analysis there, the better understanding of your risk, the ability to market there if you wanted to say like, ooh, that's actually a great risk. Other insurers are going to charge them more because they don't really, really know where that house is. So they're going to give them a big ticket item, and that insured is going to be like, ooh, ouch. But somebody else who has this data could charge them the real value of the risk that they have, which is less because they are farther away from that
Yeah,
stream.
I've been in geospatial for like 25 years because I'm old, and I never understood the preciseness of how geocoding needed to be outside of like utilities or like DoD stuff until I got into insurance and like
Yep.
rooftop geocoding, like where that building is on a campus, right? How much that
Mm-hmm.
impacts the risk for that particular exposure, right? And it became this whole now geocoding is like one of our major drivers, right? Yeah,
Yep. We didn't even get into like schedules of risk and like campuses.
so you have like an oil refinery in Louisiana, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here comes Hurricane Steve, and the storm surge is 10 feet. But does that affect the entire refinery, or is it only going to affect like certain parts of it? Right, and running
Yep.
that data is always, and knowing where your exposures are as in relation to the storm is like desperately important. It's not just a giant parcel or just a
Yep.
giant polygon, right? It's this particular thing being affected by this particular by this particular event or peril.
Yep. Exactly. And even using that data to be like, hey, did they have they installed like flood mitigation strategies? Is part of it on a steep cliff? Is something, all these different elements play into it. The vulnerability, have they hardened the structure? Can we confirm they've hardened a structure without sending a human to look at it? Because that takes a lot of time and energy, and that's that's a big cost for insurance companies.
Yeah, I guess that's huge. I mean, even like with what was in Maui back in what 23, like the CVSs remained standing because they have certain fire protections built in
Hmm.
based on CVS's requirements, right? And
Yep.
that's why CVS's a lot of them are fine because they're the roof are fire retardant and they're building with certain steel things, other factors of the building itself. But yeah, it's interesting to see how that those little things impact the greater risk, right?
Yep. That's really interesting because I bet you, I haven't heard that specific little tidbit, but that's a really good one that I'm going to start using. But I bet you when they were buying their insurance policy, that that became a factor for whomever they bought it from, however they bought it, that their buildings, they could save money on having their buildings be, more resilient to things on every dimension, right? On their insurance, but also, of course, like business interruption and things like that. And so they decided to do it, which, like, slightly off tangent, is one of the reasons why I think applying GeoAI in the insurance space can actually really support climate resiliency efforts, because having better data can tell people what they should do in their homes and how they can protect against them so that we have better outcomes when these things happen, when the floods in North Carolina happen, what your actual risk from flooding is, which really exists, what your actual risk from wildfire is, how you can harden your house or your business to protect it. I think is a really societal good that
Mm-hmm.
GeoAI can bring as well.
And what really, and as you mentioned earlier, right now the LA wildfires are going
Mhm.
bonkers, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like after Katrina, the amount of policy changes that came out of that, it's going to be interesting, to, like from a federal perspective,
Yeah.
and how that impacts like local, like individual exposures resilience. It's going to be interesting to see what falls out of this event,
Yeah.
right? Like I know they're having problems with like water pressure and other stuff, but it's going to be interesting to see how this affects building codes in those areas and how those have to evolve, right?
Yeah.
And there's
Yep.
been a bunch of there's been a bunch of work like by Financial Times and stuff about how the world's slowly becoming uninsurable.
Yep.
So yeah, it's as a yeah, you're living in very interesting times, right? but 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 not to be all doom and gloom. Let's take a
Yeah.
step back and go back to
Yeah.
talk about your blog entry though.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you see some of the challenges of the insurance industry specifically bring in not just GeoAI but generative AI and stuff into their processes?
Yeah. So the very classic ones, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So data quality. The data you're bringing in, you can't just bring in all of the like public record data and expect good answers. You need to combine that with, real provable data, satellite data, aerial data, etc. You need to train the models well. So data quality is a big piece, and I think there's a lot of really interesting things coming in online that really improve data quality around aerial and satellites, and I'm like super into that kind of stuff. So that's one element. Scale and the sheer data sizes we're talking about is going to be a big challenge. So you have to think about the kind of cloud usage for that. How are you going to actually run all that data? What answers you need to get out of it so you're running it efficiently, etc. So that's going to be another big challenge. Just understanding behind it. Right now I feel like we're in this interesting space where people talk about AI, and like a good third of people are like, oh my God, AI, the Terminator or the Matrix is going to happen tomorrow. And so they're just like, that's scary. Another third of people are like, AI is the coolest thing ever, but don't actually understand it. And then another percentage of people are like, okay, I kind of get a glimmer. And then there's actually just a really small cohort of people who are like, oh, I understand this. I see the applications. I see how we can use this. And that's a very small number. And that number has to grow a lot. So those are all big challenges. And then a big issue that's really important to my heart in particular, and I think to you as well, is also the ethics around the
Yeah.
implementation of a lot of this data. So, a thing you could think about is, you could accidentally redline a neighborhood if you said, tell me the roof quality in neighborhood X, and you just set your model loose on it, and you were like, go for it. And the model doesn't know, oh, I shouldn't think about where this in neighborhood is. It might use the neighborhood location rather than the individualized roof quality to learn roof quality, because it learns like, oh, all the roofs in quote unquote nicer neighborhoods tend to be higher quality, and so it might start bucketing roofs that are in nicer neighborhoods as higher quality based on that factor and not based on the actual roof quality, because sometimes how you build models is it's this unsupervised learning approach where it just learns based on all the data input it has, and unfortunately there is a correlation there, and you really need to think about the ethics of that and look at the data, evaluate it, check what's going on, be sure you're keeping that top of mind so you don't accidentally build in issues like that to your data and then become inherently unfair to many people. So lots of things to think about on that front that I would consider should be one of the biggest hurdles people are concerned about as they look to implement any AI solution anywhere, whether that's generative AI or GeoAI. That should be top of mind.
Well, yeah, because like in most, in the insurance industry specifically, we affect people's outcomes, right? And if an AI decides, yeah, your the property values of this neighborhood are lesser than that neighborhood, yeah, yeah, so that has all that stuff has to be mitigated, and that's why the first to market may not be the best solution. Yeah. And that's like I was InsurTech last year, big startup InsurTech startup event in Vegas, and everyone was focused on Gen AI, right? No one was focused on Geo AI. Why do you think that is?
I'm that's a really great question, and I think part of it is like Gen AI is just the thing du jour, right? Like people, it's in the mainstream news, people are hearing about it, people can use generative AI in their daily lives more easily. Geospatial data and things like that aren't really like things that you and I are necessarily, well, sorry, you and I are necessarily going, but other folks are not necessarily like, oh, let me go like look at this like ArcGIS, map and like whatever. And so, but you can go log into OpenAI or whatever your generative AI tool of choice is, and like play around with stuff and like create funny poems and do silly things like that. And of course, it's more top of mind for folks that way. Whereas with GeoAI is actually a confluence of multiple versions of AI. So AI is an overarching umbrella term for things like machine learning, computer vision, CNNs, things like that. And GeoAI encompasses all of those things into the thinking around models. So I think that's part of it, is you have to look like the big picture, the systemic thing. And it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm logging into my like ChatGPT account and like asking it to write, that awkward email for me. And you can really make the easy leap between like, oh, it wrote that awkward email for me. I could have an AI agent that like handles customer support tickets. And that's true. But GeoAI takes that like multi-step leap. And I think there is not enough folks focus on that and selling that, but also they're going to have to like overcome the fact that it's just easier to see what's going on with Gen AI, and it's so in the news too, right? Like every other
Yeah.
news article is about something like that. So
Yeah. So if you're advising, let's say, a mid-sized insurer who's starting a GeoAI journey, what would you recommend the first steps to be? Like, let's say the first year of what they should do, and then maybe a 5-year plan.
yeah, I think I'd love to see like insurtechs and vendors get into this space more, although there are some really great ones out there. But for a mid-sized insurer, I would advise them to actually go to a big data analytics player that's doing this themselves. So find the big data analytics player and work with them, because it's going to need to be a big player in the space who understands GeoAI, who can bring in lots of different sources of data, really focus on this, really have, great outcomes. And then, optimally look at the best one that's doing that, ask them hard questions about their ethics and their practices around that, ask them hard questions about implementation, about what data they need, about how they do things like ground truth and collecting ground truth data and validating their models against ground truth data, and really interrogating how they're doing it, and then buying it from them. So year one would be finding organizations that do that, comparing them, asking about their results, understanding the problem space you're trying to get at, how they do that. And then years, 2 through 5 would be actually implementing that into your workflows, which is, I'm saying that in a very short, easy sentence, but is really hard to do, as we all know, which is why it's a 2 through 5 problem. But I really think the best play is for the large analytics players to get into this space, to leverage this, and to package up GeoAI tools to sell to the insurance space because of the sheer size. In the same way that, Amazon and Google and Microsoft provide cloud services, I don't think, mid-size insurance carrier A is going to be able to go and actually build a GeoAI solution, nor should they. Their business is risk management and underwriting. They should be purchasing solutions around that, and solving that. Now, if you're one of the big guys, you might want to do that yourself. That's a, build versus buy question you might have internally. You'll need a big team, I think, to do it successfully.
And lots of GPUs.
Yeah. And a big chunk of cloud time that you're willing to pay for. That's probably going to be one of your biggest costs.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe you'll buy a satellite,
Start a defunct power plant.
Solar
So
farm.
as we all know, AI is chock full of buzz phrases, right?
Yes, I love
And
buzzwords.
so what I've done is I went to ChatGPT and asked it to generate a list of 5 GeoAI buzzwords.
Okay.
Okay, there are no right or wrong answers to this,
All
as
right.
this is blatantly a pop quiz for you, right?
Excellent.
So I'm gonna ask you I'm gonna ask you to define 5 buzzwords that
All right.
ChatGPT generated around GeoAI. The first one: what is dynamic risk profiling?
Well, I'm like, man, I feel like I should think of like a funny answer versus a real answer. But my
Take it whatever direction you
interpretation
want to go with. Yeah.
of dynamic risk, what did you say? Dynamic risk
Profiling.
profiling would be to understand the risk as it changes over time, in real time, and which is probably a thing that people should be considering, because as it turns out, we live in an entropic universe and things change, and therefore how the risk is one day is not going to be what it looks like the other day. So that's how I'm going to define that. Whether or not
Okay.
other people agree with that definition.
Again, no right or wrong answers. This is
Yeah.
all just fun, right? Cloud native GeoAI. I know that's like four buzzwords thrown together, right?
I know. I have such like trauma around cloud stuff because I spent like a good few years trying to convince people about moving to cloud. And so the big difference between cloud and on-premise, right, is that they inherently need different tools from the way they run differently. And so when you're cloud native, you're actually building with the cloud tools in mind to run in the cloud versus, say, run in an on-premise installation. Sorry, that is that's such a boring answer.
That's
I would much more be like, it was born in the clouds.
fun.
But actually building an application for the cloud and not for an on-premise solution. So it works natively in the cloud and can take advantage of all the cloud like benefits that you have in terms of scale and processing powers and all that fun stuff, which you need. I don't think you can actually do GeoAI successfully in an on-premise way. Personally.
I bought NVIDIA released that new Nano chip the other day. That's based on their Nano Jetson thing. I picked up one, and right now I have a little heat sink on my desk, just running an AI model I'm doing for a class. So we'll see. It's nowhere near done, but we'll see where it goes.
All right. Well, now I'm curious. I suppose if that happens, or like quantum computing really
Yeah.
comes into place. Although that always makes me think of that book, the Michael Crichton book, like Timeline or whatever. It had quantum computing. Anyways, I digress.
Yeah.
It's a fun book.
So number 3, geo enablement.
Geo enablement. Enabling people to use geo data better.
Works for me.
Yep.
Again,
all right.
I did ask it to define these. It just has to generate some words. Geospatial data fusion.
Oh, yeah, that's just mashing up geodata, right? Data fusion is such a funny topic because people are like, data fusion! And I'm like, you're just talking about like aggregating data sources so you get better answers. Like, it just sounds cool to say data fusion, but like, you're just combining data sets in like a smart way. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it needs that fancy term.
And the last one is like it is literally a word salad of buzz phrases.
Ooh.
Geospatial real-time predictive modeling.
That is word salad. I mean, that is that is what it says though. Like it's using geospatial data gotten in real time. So from that, I would mean like derived from satellite, aerial, etc. Sensor data could be really. We didn't talk about sensor data, but that could be really interesting. And using those data inputs, probably with some dynamic risk, whatever profiling you were talking about earlier, to do predictive modeling for what were the outcomes going to be, in the future. What do we think this might look like? So yeah, that is real word salad though. So choose your own adventure on that
Yeah,
one.
I like this. This is fun. But we're almost at time, and I know we both have a hard stop in a few minutes. So I just want to ask a final question.
Yeah.
Our listeners on this, if they have one takeaway from this discussion, what do you want the listeners to remember about GeoAI and the insurance vertical?
I think they're missing a trick if they're focused on Gen AI, and they need to change their focus to GeoAI as a transformative application in the insurance space to really unlock the ability. Wow, talking about buzzword bingos, really unlock, unleash the ability to foundationally change how we understand risk, to really genuinely understand at an individual risk level a holistic view of risk for each property, each element of a property. That's the power of GeoAI. And if you could understand at scale the real risk for every single property that you are underwriting, or every single property in your portfolio as a reinsurer that you are underwriting, You can imagine the possibilities around pricing, around resilience, around mitigation, around working with governments to improve mitigation, communication with the public. There's so many things you could do if you really truly understood your risk for each individual location at scale. And so if I was going to have any big takeaway, it would be that insurance folks should be thinking about GeoAI and leave their cool AI agent replace underwriters projects, for later. Because they'll need to do this to do that project realistically anyways in 10 years. So that would be my big takeaway.
And kind of the last thing, where can our listeners find you if they want to find you on the internet?
On the internet. I hang out on LinkedIn a lot. So Elizabeth Doughty on LinkedIn. I do write that Substack article, InsureGal, which is spelled very much how it sounds. I have a webpage that I do an okayest job keeping up, but LinkedIn is really the best place to find me on the internet these days. Occasionally in Blue Sky, but
yeah, I'm still getting my legs underneath me on Blue Sky too. Okay, Elizabeth, I appreciate your time on this cold New England morning.
I know.
And I appreciate your time and your insights because you're one of the top experts in this field, I believe, especially the insurance vertical. So thank you for making 38 minutes of your time available to me and the American Geographical Society, and you will probably be speaking next year at Geography 2050 on one of our risk panels.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
if you want to see Elizabeth in real time, you have to come to Geography 2050 next November at Columbia Climate School, and you can see her on stage in all of her glory. Okay, Elizabeth, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, T.
Bye.
Have a great day. Bye.
This has been the Road to Geography 2050 podcast. If you'd like to hear other experts like Elizabeth Doughty talk about GeoAI and how its role in geography is going to change the world, please join us at Columbia University next November 21st and 22nd for Geography 2050.